What would you do if, on your wedding day, a stranger walked in and revealed a secret about the person you just married? This story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Tell me in the comments if you believe everyone has a past they try to protect, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this. The wedding in Chicago felt like a scene lifted from a dream. Cameras flashed as Isabella Rowan, the celebrated CEO whose name often graced the covers of business magazines, stood radiant in her gown. Her smile carried both pride and vulnerability, the look of a woman who had fought hard battles in boardrooms but found something softer, something truer, in the man beside her. Daniel Carter stood quietly at her side, his hand steady over hers, a presence calm and grounding. To most in the room, he was a simple single father, known only for his devotion to his little girl. Tonight, he was the man Isabella had chosen above all others. The reception hall glowed with golden light, crystal glasses catching the shimmer of chandeliers as laughter and music wove through the air. Business leaders from Isabella's world mingled with Daniel's neighbors and Lily's school friends, a blend of polished suits and simple dresses, each guest united by the joy of witnessing two very different lives become one. For Daniel, whose world had long been measured in quiet mornings and school runs, the grandeur of the evening seemed distant. What mattered was the way Isabella's eyes met his, the way she leaned slightly toward him, as if the rest of the world could wait. Then the rhythm of the celebration shifted. From the back of the hall, a man in a dark tailored suit moved forward, his steps purposeful, his gaze locked on the groom. His presence drew notice, not for his clothing, but for the gravity he carried, the kind that silences conversation without a word. When he reached their table, he extended his hand, his voice low yet clear enough to ripple across the room. "Commander Carter," he said with quiet certainty. "It's been a long time." The title fell like a stone into still water. Conversations faltered, glasses hovered midair, and even the music seemed to hesitate. Isabella turned toward her husband, her smile fading as confusion spread across her face. "Commander." The word clung to the air, heavy with history she had never been told. Daniel's jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened just enough for her to notice. He met the man's eyes, a flicker of recognition passing between them, then shifted his gaze to Isabella. For the first time since she had known him, she saw something different. An edge of tension, a shadow of another life. The room buzzed with whispers, guests exchanging puzzled glances, reporters already sensing a story that reached far beyond romance and vows. Isabella's fingers pressed against Daniel's hand, searching for reassurance. Instead, she felt the unspoken truth rising around them, a truth that carried battlefields and secrets hidden beneath the quiet life he had shown her. In that charged moment, the fairy tale sheen of the evening gave way to something deeper, something unanticipated. Daniel Carter, the man she had just promised her life to, was not only the devoted father she adored. He was a man with a past carved in silence, a past the world had just begun to glimpse. The silence that followed the stranger's words lingered like a shadow. Even after the music rose again and the laughter tried to return, that night marked the first time Isabella glimpsed the part of Daniel Carter's life he had never spoken of, the part he had buried beneath years of ordinary routines and quiet devotion. To the world, he was a groom. To his daughter, he was simply dad. But long before this night, he had been someone else entirely, a commander in the special forces, a man who had carried both duty and loss across distant battlefields. Daniel was 38 years old, though the lines on his face told stories of a life that had aged him far faster than the calendar suggested. Years earlier, cancer had taken his wife, leaving him alone with a little girl who looked at him as both anchor and compass. Lily was 7 now, her laughter light and unguarded, her presence the reason Daniel rose each morning and endured the quiet ache of grief each night. She never saw the exhaustion in his eyes or the heaviness that came when the house finally fell silent. For her, he chose gentleness. For her, he built a world that felt steady when his own heart was still learning how to beat again. Most people in their suburban neighborhood knew him as a consultant who worked from home. It was a vague title, intentionally so, enough to explain why he was always available to pick Lily up from school, attend every recital, and volunteer at community events. His neighbors saw a man who drove an aging sedan, who wore clothes chosen more for comfort than style, who smiled politely but rarely spoke of himself. What they didn't see, what he made sure they never saw, was the soldier who had once given orders that carried the weight of life and death. That part of him remained locked away, sealed by choice, because Daniel had promised himself that Lily's childhood would not be defined by shadows. At home, he built rhythms that steadied them both. Breakfasts of scrambled eggs and toast shared across a small kitchen table, afternoons of homework spread across the couch while he typed quietly on his laptop, evenings filled with bedtime stories, his voice softening as Lily drifted to sleep, her head resting against his chest, as if that was the only place she ever needed to be. Those were the moments that mattered, the ones he clung to when the memories of his wife's last days threatened to pull him under. Behind the quiet life was intention. He had chosen to step away from a career that could have brought recognition and power, choosing instead the anonymity of a man no one looked at twice. The world of high command, of military operations that never made headlines, was gone. What remained was a father who carried the scars of war in silence, channeling every ounce of strength into raising a little girl who would never know just how much he had once sacrificed. For Isabella, standing at his side on their wedding day, those truths were still hidden. She knew Daniel as a man who never cared about her status, who never once asked what her wealth could buy, who treated her not as a CEO, but as a woman who still longed for something simple and real. She loved the way he placed Lily at the center of his world, the way his priorities never wavered. What she did not yet understand was that his devotion had been forged not only by love, but by loss of comrades, loss of a wife, loss of a life he had once known. Daniel Carter had lived as a commander, but he had chosen to live as a father. And in that choice, he had built a life of quiet strength, a life that Isabella was only beginning to uncover. While Daniel had chosen a life of quiet devotion, Isabella Rowan's world could not have been more different. At 35, she stood at the head of Rowan Tech Innovations, a company whose name had become synonymous with progress in healthcare and education technology. Boardrooms listened when she spoke. Investors followed her lead. Employees admired her relentless drive. From the outside, she was the image of success, a woman who had climbed from entry-level programmer to CEO before her mid-30s, a figure gracing the cover of magazines and speaking at conferences that celebrated her as a trailblazer. Yet behind the polished image was a loneliness that no quarterly earnings report could disguise. Her days were measured in back-to-back meetings, late-night strategy calls, and flights between cities where she was welcomed with applause but returned to hotel rooms in silence. In those rare moments when she allowed herself to imagine a partner, someone to share both victories and disappointments, the reality was always disappointing. Men who approached her often carried the same look in their eyes, a mix of admiration and calculation. They were drawn not to her laughter, not to the books she read in quiet corners, not to the way she hummed old songs when she cooked, but to the lifestyle her success could offer. Over the years, Isabella had learned to guard herself. The first time she allowed her heart to hope, she discovered he was more interested in her connections than her conversation. The second time, she realized he was threatened by her ambition, treating her success as a competition rather than a partnership. By the third, she stopped counting. Each disappointment added another layer to the walls she built around her heart. Better to pour herself into work, she told herself, than to gamble again on love that would crumble under the weight of her name and fortune. Still, there were nights when the silence was too sharp, when even the view from her high-rise apartment windows could not distract from the ache of absence. She longed for conversations that were not about market projections, for dinners where the laughter came from something simple and real. She had grown used to being respected, admired, even envied, but what she yearned for most was to be known. Friends urged her to keep trying, to meet someone who could look past the title and the wealth, but Isabella knew how rare that was. Most men either tried to use her success as a ladder for their own ambitions or shrank beneath the shadow of her accomplishments. Both paths led to the same place, loneliness masked by appearances. And so slowly she accepted the idea that perhaps her life would remain divided, celebrated in public, solitary in private. It was this balance, victory on the outside, emptiness within, that shaped her when she walked into that charity gala in Chicago. She wore a gown that caught the light like water, her posture confident, her smile practiced, Yet inside, she carried the same quiet question she had carried for years. Would anyone ever see her for more than her title, her company, her fortune? That night, surrounded by donors and executives, Isabella did not yet know the answer was waiting in the form of a man she had never noticed before, a man who spoke gently to a child, who laughed without pretense, who seemed more interested in helping than impressing. Long before she knew his history, before she heard the name Commander Carter whispered across a wedding hall, Isabella Rowan was already searching for something real, something she thought she might never find. The night of the literacy gala unfolded beneath chandeliers that shimmered like captured stars, the grand ballroom of a Chicago hotel alive with conversation and the hum of anticipation. For Isabella Rowan, such events had become routine. Her company was a major donor, her presence expected, her polished smile part of the performance. She moved through the room with practiced grace, acknowledging board members, answering polite questions about Rowan Tech's next project. Yet beneath the satin gown and the calculated charm, the same loneliness from her high-rise apartment lingered, quiet and sharp. Daniel Carter did not belong to that world. He arrived with his daughter Lily, her small hand gripping his as they stepped past velvet ropes into the bustle of formality. To the donors in tailored suits and glittering dresses, he was simply a volunteer, one of many helping to organize activities for the children who were the true heart of the evening. His suit was modest, his tie slightly off-center, but the warmth in his voice as he spoke to Lily made the polished setting feel suddenly less intimidating. Isabella first noticed him when she paused at the edge of the children's corner, away from the clinking glasses and the murmured deals. Daniel knelt beside a little girl who clung to her chair, too shy to join the group. His voice was low, patient, almost musical in its calm. Within minutes, the child's grip loosened, her eyes brightened, and she slipped from her chair to chase the others across the carpet. Isabella found herself lingering, watching the way Daniel smiled, not with triumph, but with relief, as if coaxing a child's joy back into the world was the only reward he needed. Lily soon joined in, her laughter carrying above the hum of the gala. Daniel's gaze softened as he watched her, his every gesture reflecting the steady rhythm of a father who had built his life around one small, beating heart. He guided her gently, reminding her of what they had practiced at home. When things feel too busy, we take a quiet break. Then try again, he murmured, and Lily nodded, reassured, before darting back into the crowd of children. Isabella's chest tightened at the sight. Here was a man whose presence carried no agenda, only care. When she finally approached, their introduction was disarmingly ordinary. "I'm Isabella," she said, extending her hand. He took it with quiet confidence. "Daniel Carter, and this is my daughter Lily. We're here because she wanted to help other kids learn to read." Lily's shy nod and small voice explaining why books mattered drew a smile from Isabella, a smile unpolished, unguarded. They spoke not of stock prices or product launches, but of children, of learning, of the responsibility to make sure privilege was never wasted. Daniel's words carried no interest in who she was to the business world. To him, she was simply another parent, another person who cared. For Isabella, accustomed to men who measured her worth in dollars and headlines, the simplicity was startling. As the night wore on, she found her attention drifting away from investors and back to the corner where Daniel laughed softly with the children. There was something about the way he carried himself, steady, unpretentious, utterly focused on the small world that mattered most, that drew her in. She could not have known then how much of his past he kept hidden, or how deeply their lives would entwine. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as a woman standing in a crowded room, watching a father love his child. What began as a chance introduction at a charity gala slowly grew into something Isabella Rowan had not expected. After that evening, their paths continued to cross, sometimes at community events, sometimes in quiet moments when Lily's school hosted programs that Daniel volunteered to support. Each encounter unfolded with the same simplicity that had first caught Isabella's attention. Daniel never lingered on her title, never asked about her company's revenue or the circles of influence she moved in. Instead, he asked about the children, about the books they were donating, about the ways small acts could create lasting change. It unsettled her at first, this lack of calculation. For years, she had grown used to conversations where every word seemed to carry an angle, where interest in her felt like a strategy rather than sincerity. With Daniel, there was none of that. When he spoke to her, he listened fully. When he smiled, it wasn't for effect. She began to notice the way his eyes softened when Lily tugged at his sleeve, the way his shoulders relaxed only when he was certain his daughter felt safe. Those details told her more about him than any resume ever could. They started with small exchanges: coffee after a meeting at the community center, a phone call about a fundraiser. Gradually, those moments stretched into long walks after Lily's bedtime, when Daniel would share pieces of his life in careful fragments. He spoke about being a widower, about the promise he had made to his late wife to give their daughter a normal childhood. He spoke about the challenges of balancing work and parenting, the exhaustion that came with carrying two roles at once. Isabella listened, not as a CEO analyzing data, but as a woman who understood what it meant to carry burdens in silence. In turn, Daniel asked her questions no one else bothered to ask, not about her company, but about her favorite childhood storybooks, about the kind of music she played when she was alone, about what made her laugh when no one was watching. For the first time in years, Isabella found herself opening up, sharing parts of herself that had nothing to do with balance sheets or shareholder meetings. He never judged, never rushed. He simply listened. And in that listening, she felt seen. Lily became the quiet bridge between them. Her drawings, her questions, her unfiltered honesty created spaces where Isabella could step into something that felt almost like family. She would join them for afternoons at the park, laughing when Lily insisted on teaching her how to fly a kite, or share dinners where the food was simple, but the warmth was real. Isabella found herself treasuring the ordinary, the mismatched plates, the squeak of Lily's laughter, the way Daniel leaned back in his chair with a tired smile that spoke of contentment. One evening, as the city lights glittered beyond the windows of Daniel's modest home, Isabella realized the shift had already happened. What had begun as friendship had deepened into something else, something steady, something rare. It was not marked by grand gestures or declarations, but by the quiet certainty she felt when Daniel reached for her hand across the table, or when Lily curled up against her side as if she had always belonged there. For a woman who had built her life around caution, Isabella was surprised at how natural it felt to let the walls fall. And for Daniel, who had vowed to live only for his daughter, it was a revelation to discover his heart still had room for more. Months passed, marked not by dramatic milestones, but by the quiet rhythm of a life gently woven together. There were school recitals where Isabella sat in the front row, her applause matching Daniel's steady pride. There were late evenings in his modest kitchen, where the three of them laughed over Lily's stories and shared meals that had nothing glamorous about them except the comfort they carried. It was in those ordinary moments that Isabella realized her heart had found its home. Daniel knew it too. He had spent so long keeping his life simple, guarding his daughter's world from unnecessary upheaval. Yet with Isabella, simplicity didn't feel like hiding. It felt like building. He watched the way she bent down to listen to Lily's questions, the way she carried herself with power in public, but softened completely in their home. And one quiet evening, he decided it was time. There were no crowds, no stage lights, no elaborate display, just the three of them sitting together after dinner, Lily's crayons scattered across the table. Daniel reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out a small velvet box. The ring inside was not flashy, chosen carefully for meaning rather than spectacle. A single stone set in a simple band, reflecting the kind of love he believed in, steady, enduring, without pretense. He looked at Isabella, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't have much to offer in the way of grandeur," he said, "but I can promise you a life built on honesty, on love, and on family. Isabella, will you marry me?" For a woman who had once been courted with lavish gestures and grand promises, it was the humility that undid her. Tears gathered in her eyes as she nodded, her yes spoken with a conviction that left no doubt. Lily squealed with delight, wrapping her arms around both of them, her small voice carrying the joy that words could barely hold. In that moment, their future was sealed, not by diamonds or headlines, but by something far greater: trust. The wedding, planned months later, reflected that same balance. Isabella's world demanded a certain elegance. Daniel's called for intimacy. They chose a historic mansion in Chicago, its gardens rich with old charm, its halls filled with warmth rather than extravagance. Guests arrived from both sides. Isabella's colleagues, investors, and industry leaders mingling with Daniel's neighbors, school teachers, and the friends who had stood quietly by his side for years. The blend of polished suits and simple attire created a harmony that surprised everyone. Lily, dressed in a gown that made her feel like a princess, walked proudly as the flower girl, her excitement contagious, her every step a reminder of why the day mattered most. When Isabella walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Daniel's. She saw not the man the world speculated about, not the man the whispers called mysterious, but the father who had made a promise to his daughter and now extended that promise to her. The vows they spoke were not designed for spectacle. They were tender, direct, filled with the quiet certainty of two people who had already lived through enough to know what mattered. Rings were exchanged, hands held tightly, promises sealed in the presence of both the powerful and the ordinary. When the reception began, laughter rose high and music filled the air. But for Daniel and Isabella, the world had narrowed to a single truth. They had chosen each other, not because of what they had to gain, but because of what they had already found. The reception at the old Chicago mansion carried the glow of a perfect evening. Laughter echoed across the high ceilings. Crystal glasses chimed with every toast, and the garden lights beyond the windows twinkled like stars come down to join the celebration. Isabella moved gracefully among her guests, introducing Daniel to colleagues who admired her leadership, while Daniel's friends from Lily's school shared stories that warmed the room with their simplicity. It felt for a moment like two separate worlds had been stitched together seamlessly. Daniel stood near the head table, his hand resting lightly on Isabella's as Lily darted between the guests, her laughter a thread of joy weaving through the music. For all his efforts to keep life quiet, to remain unseen, tonight he could not avoid the spotlight. Yet in Isabella's eyes, he found reassurance, and in Lily's carefree smile, he found courage. Then, through the glow and music, the air shifted. A man approached, tall, dressed in a dark suit cut sharp against the softness of the evening. His stride was purposeful, his expression steady, the kind of presence that did not belong to a party, but to a command. Conversation slowed as he neared, curiosity following him like a shadow. He stopped before Daniel, extended his hand, and spoke with a voice that carried weight far beyond the room. "Commander Carter," he said, his tone firm with recognition. "It's been a long time since Afghanistan." The words fell heavy, silencing even the band for a moment. Guests exchanged startled glances, whispers stirring like wind through leaves. Isabella's hand slipped slightly in Daniel's, her eyes wide as she turned to him, confusion flashing into disbelief. "Commander, Afghanistan." None of these words belonged to the man she thought she knew. Daniel's jaw tightened, his shoulders straightening instinctively, a reflex of discipline that spoke volumes before he uttered a word. For the first time, Isabella saw a different version of him, a glimpse of the man he had been before the quiet life, before the modest routines. "I think you have me mistaken," Daniel answered carefully, his voice calm but edged with tension. "I'm here to celebrate my wedding day." But the man did not retreat. His eyes held Daniel's with steady certainty. "Sir, with respect, I served under your command. I'd recognize you anywhere. You saved lives. You carried us through when no one else could." The ripple of whispers grew louder now, reporters among the guests already sensing the magnitude of what they had just heard. To them, Daniel was no longer simply the humble groom of a powerful CEO. He was a man with a past, a hidden history that suddenly stood exposed beneath the glitter of the chandeliers. Isabella's breath caught, her voice trembling as she asked the question she had never thought to ask. "Daniel, what is he talking about? Why is he calling you commander?" Her eyes searched his, not with anger yet, but with a fragile fear, the fear of realizing the person you trust most has been carrying a secret too large to ignore. Daniel met her gaze, and in that single moment, he understood that the life he had tried so carefully to protect, the ordinary peace he had fought to preserve for Lily, could no longer remain untouched. The celebration continued around them, but the heart of the evening had shifted. What had begun as the merging of two lives now carried the weight of revelation, of questions unasked, of truths long buried rising to the surface. And Isabella, standing in her wedding gown, realized the man she had chosen was both exactly who she loved and someone she had never fully known. The echoes of the wedding reception still lingered in Isabella's mind as the newlyweds retreated to their honeymoon suite. The laughter, the toasts, the music, all of it had blurred the moment that stranger's voice cut through the evening and left her shaken. She sat by the window now, the city lights of Chicago sprawling beneath them. Her gown exchanged for something softer, but the tension between them sharper than any fabric seam. Daniel moved quietly across the room, loosening his tie, his expression unreadable. He had faced storms before, but never this one. The silence between them was not the calm he loved. It was heavy, filled with questions she could no longer hold back. "Daniel," Isabella finally said, her voice low but unyielding, "I need to know the truth. Who was that man? Why did he call you commander? Why have you never told me about Afghanistan?" Her words trembled with both hurt and fear. Not anger yet, but the kind of ache that comes from realizing someone you love has carried a life you were never allowed to see. She searched his face, praying he would not deny her. Not this time. Daniel sank into the chair opposite her, his hands clasped tightly together. For a long moment, he simply breathed, steadying himself as though preparing for a mission. Then he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I was a commander," he admitted, his eyes locked on hers. "Special forces. I led men into places most people never hear about. Afghanistan was only one of them. I carried responsibilities and losses that I can't put into words." He paused, his throat tightening, memories pressing at the edges of his composure. "When my wife was dying, she made me promise that Lily would grow up in peace, that she wouldn't live in the shadow of what I had done. So I walked away. I left the uniform behind, and I chose to be nothing more than her father. That's why I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I couldn't risk dragging that world back into hers." Isabella's eyes glistened as she absorbed his words. The pieces fell into place, the way he carried himself, the quiet strength, the guarded nature of his past. It explained the discipline, the resilience, the way he seemed to anticipate more than he revealed, but it also revealed the depth of his silence. "You should have told me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We stood at the altar today, and I thought I knew everything about the man I married. Instead, I find out with the rest of the world." Daniel leaned forward, his voice raw. "I know, and I'm sorry. I thought by keeping it hidden I was protecting you too, protecting us. I wanted you to fall in love with the life I've built now, not the life I left behind." For a moment, the room held only their breathing, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Isabella's heart wavered between betrayal and understanding. She saw the man who had hidden his past, but she also saw the father who had sacrificed everything to keep his daughter safe. Slowly, she reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "I don't need every classified detail," she said softly, "but I do need honesty. If we're building a life together, there can't be walls between us." Daniel nodded, the weight of years in his eyes. "No more walls," he promised. "I promise." That night, for the first time since the word commander shattered their wedding, they sat together. Not as a CEO and a soldier, not as newlyweds hiding secrets, but as two people choosing whether love could hold the truth as well as the dream. The days that followed were not easy. The wedding headlines that should have celebrated a union of love now carried a sharper angle. CEO Isabella Rowan marries former Special Forces commander. Reporters lingered outside their home. Stories swirled about missions Daniel had never spoken of. Questions rose about why such a man would choose a quiet suburban life. For Isabella, the shock of discovery still lingered, but so did the memory of his words, the promise he had made to his dying wife, the devotion he carried for Lily, the reason he had built walls of silence. At first, her heart ached with the weight of betrayal. She had stood at the altar, believing she knew every piece of him. But as she watched him move through the storm with quiet steadiness, she began to see what had been hidden behind that silence. He had not concealed his past to deceive her. He had done it to protect the fragile peace he had created for his daughter. His secrecy was born of love, not mistrust. One evening, away from cameras and questions, Isabella sat across from Daniel in their kitchen, Lily asleep upstairs, the house finally still. She reached for his hand, her voice gentle but firm. "I can understand why you did it," she said. "But if we're going to move forward, Daniel, There can't be parts of you I'm not allowed to see. I don't need classified details, I just need honesty always. His grip tightened around hers, his eyes steady with the weight of the vow. You have it, he promised. No more walls, no more secrets. Slowly, the fracture between them began to heal. Isabella chose not to dwell on the years of silence, but on the courage it took for him to step away from glory and recognition to raise a child in peace. She understood now that he hadn't been ashamed of his past, only determined that it wouldn't define their future. The world, too, seemed to shift its gaze. At first, speculation buzzed through headlines, but soon admiration replaced curiosity. Articles praised Daniel not for the medals he refused to display, but for the choice he made after war. A decorated commander who had traded uniform and power for bedtime stories and school pickups, a man who valued fatherhood more than fame. Instead of scandal, the story became a testament, proof that true strength could be found in sacrifice and quiet devotion. For Isabella, it was humbling to witness. In the circles she had lived in, power was measured in influence and wealth. But here was a man who had walked away from both and built something stronger. Each time she saw him tuck Lily's blanket tighter at night or kneel to tie her shoelaces, she felt the truth settle deeper in her heart. This was not deception. This was protection. And as the noise of public attention slowly faded, the bond between them grew clearer. They would walk forward together, not as a CEO and a commander, but as two people bound by trust, raising a child who had been the center of every choice. Isabella had asked for honesty, Daniel had promised it. And for the first time since that stranger's voice interrupted their wedding, she believed in the promise of their future. Months later, the storm of headlines had quieted into something gentler, something Daniel never expected: respect. Where once there had been speculation and whispers, there was now admiration. His story had shifted from a secret revealed to a choice celebrated. And on a crisp Chicago evening, in the ballroom of another grand hotel, that transformation reached its fullest measure. The gala was for veterans, an event Isabella had long supported through Rowan Tech Innovations. This year was different. This year she stood at the podium with Daniel seated in the front row, Lily perched proudly between them. The room was filled with donors, former service members, and community leaders. Cameras flashed, but their presence no longer felt invasive. Instead, the air carried a sense of reverence. Isabella's voice was steady as she addressed the crowd. Tonight, I want to honor not only those who have served, but also the quiet heroes who choose family after service ends. My husband, Daniel Carter, is one of those men. He was once a commander in Special Forces, a decorated soldier who carried responsibilities most of us can't imagine. But his greatest act of courage was stepping away from that life to keep a promise to his daughter and give her a childhood filled with peace. The room erupted in applause, but before Daniel could even stand, Lily tugged free of her chair. With the boldness of a 7-year-old who had never learned to fear a microphone, she trotted up to the stage, gasps of delight following her. Isabella bent to hand her the mic. I'm proud of my daddy, Lily said, her voice clear and innocent. He helped keep people safe, but what I love most is that he reads me stories every night and makes me feel safe too. The room stilled, and then, as if one heartbeat connected them all, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall, not for medals or missions, but for a father's love, a family's bond, and the simple truth spoken by a child. Daniel's eyes glistened as he rose to join Isabella and Lily on stage, his arms encircling them both. For Isabella, it was a moment of deep confirmation. She had once feared his silence, feared the secrets of his past. Now she saw how those secrets had been transformed, not into walls, but into the foundation of a new life. Daniel was no longer just the man she had fallen for at a charity gala. He was her husband, her partner, her equal. When the applause finally faded, the three of them left the stage hand in hand. Cameras still flashed, questions still floated, but none of it mattered. Outside, the Chicago night stretched wide and quiet, the mansion's doors closed behind them. And for a brief, perfect moment, it was only the three of them. A father, a mother, and a daughter, a family who had chosen love over recognition, peace over glory. As they walked together into the waiting night, Daniel knew the past would always be part of him. But so would this. Isabella's hand in his, Lily's laughter ringing like a promise of tomorrow. Whatever came next, they would face it not as a commander and a CEO, but as a family who had found in each other the truest kind of strength. In the captivating story of Daniel Carter, a former Special Forces commander turned devoted single dad, and Isabella Rowan, a powerful CEO yearning for genuine connection, we uncover a profound life lesson. True love thrives on embracing the entirety of a person, past, present, and scars included, when built on trust and authenticity. Daniel's hidden military past, revealed dramatically on their wedding day, initially shakes Isabella's faith, exposing the weight of his silence as he protected his daughter Lily from the shadows of his battlefield losses. Yet, through honest reckoning, they transform betrayal into understanding, proving that love isn't about erasing the past, but weaving it into a shared future. Their journey, from a chance meeting at a charity gala to a family forged in quiet moments of kite flying and bedtime stories, stirs the heart, evoking tears for the sacrifices we make for those we love and the courage it takes to open our truths to others. It reminds us that strength isn't in titles or triumphs, but in choosing vulnerability, in building bonds that honor both who we are and who we've been. In a world quick to judge by surfaces, this tale urges us to seek the deeper stories behind those we cherish, finding richness in their unspoken chapters. If this narrative moved you, resonating with your own experiences of hidden truths or love that grew through trust, share your reflections in the comments below. What moment in your life taught you to embrace another's past? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories of resilience, love, and second chances. Your support keeps this community vibrant, one heartfelt tale at a time.